Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a little deep dive into some very interesting analog utility modules which I got from Nekyia. Now you've probably seen I've covered some of their modules in videos before. The Obsidian, the Opal and Sosumi are in a video which I'll have the link to up top of course, but they've come up with some new modules which they sent to me. Cadence, which is a triple attack-decay envelope generator. Muzzle, which is kind of a vactrol-based filter. Mezcal, which is a wave shaper utility module. And what I found is I find myself reaching for these modules like Cadence, Mezcal, Obsidian and Opal time and time again when I want to build the modulation heart of a patch setup. No matter what sort of patch you're building, you're always going to need some sort of modulation. You're always going to need envelopes and you're always going to need LFOs. So let's get started with some patching examples, make some music, and we'll build on the concepts I introduce and you'll get to understand how these modules really work. Let's start with some very, very basic patches. And like I do in all my videos, I'm going to build on our initial patches as we can introduce new concepts and ideas. So to get started, we will do the classic, just a VCA. So I'm going to use a Keto for that with an instro oscillator here because I have different wave shapes we can play with. And we are going to use envelopes from the new Cadence module. So let's explore how that works. And I've got Mimetic Digitalis set up here as a very straightforward sequencer. So we can just take a pitch sequence out of, say, sequencer 1 here on Mimetic. I will zero that and then shred it so that it's within a reasonable octave range. Then let's take the square wave output. We're going to patch it into the input for the VCAs here. Then I want to take a trigger. Every time the sequencer generates a step, we're going to patch it into trigger input here on Cadence. We'll take the envelope out of Cadence. This is not exactly rocket science. We're just doing a very basic setup. Unmute the channel there on a Keto. And what I'm going to do is take the output of a Keto, the mix output here. I'm going to patch it into the input of this favorite avocado toast. You've seen me use this in other videos. It's a very nice analog distorting filter, but don't worry, we're also going to explore a few other filters. And I'll patch the output of favorite avocado toast into, say, this channel 3 here on the mixer. That's set to mono. We'll turn off the sound so we get a nice dry signal. And then last of all, I'm just going to patch a clock from Palms here into the sequencer. Now I can just open up the VCA here. Okay, we have a very basic pattern. Nice plucky envelope, attack-decay envelope coming out of Cadence. Let's go ahead and modulate the envelope decay time using another stepped voltage here out of Mimetic Digitalis. Now let's turn it on, hit unmute here. And straight away, there's a bit too much modulation going on here. I actually want to limit this down. Let's go ahead and use Opal for that. And so what we will do is we will unpatch this and we're going to patch the output of our stepped voltages into channel X on Opal. So what I want to use Opal for here is just to attenuate, reduce the range down on that stepped voltage coming out. So let's just do that. Now we unmute. Now we get a little bit more control. Okay. Still a very basic vanilla sounding sort of, progression, right? It's just an oscillator going into a VCA. Let's modulate the filter here. Now, I want to do something a little bit interesting. As soon as the envelope opens to play the sound, what I want to do is I want to start a modulation going on the filter and send a different envelope into that to modulate it. Now, typically you would do that by triggering something using a trigger delay. But Cadence has this lovely feature built in that these switches here will trigger the envelope below the one above it once the decay cycle is finished on the top on the envelope above. So let's take a look. I'm going to turn on that switch there. Now you notice that when envelope, shall we say 1 or A finishes its cycle, the light goes off, this one triggers. Now we have 2 envelopes being generated from 1 trigger. Let's take that second envelope and we can patch it somewhere. And then we'll just turn on the oscillator here. Now, if I just patch it in like this, I'm not quite getting the sound I want out of it. We just unmute the VCA here. kind of want the filter to close. So I want that envelope to be inverted. Now, how do I invert something? Well, let's explore Mezcal. Mezcal is a series of really useful CV utilities. We've got a 1 to 3 mult, which is normaled all the way down. So if you plug something in here, it goes into each of the 4 sections. We also have this wave rectifier. We've got a half wave, full wave, and inverter. And that's what we're going to use to invert our envelope. We have got a summing circuit, so 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 goes to the output. And we have this really useful threshold detector, which enables you to patch a voltage in here. And one of the 2 outputs go high, or representing the voltage. It's sent to one of the 2 outputs, depending on whether this is above or below the threshold. So let's take our envelope that we're using for this modulation. Let's take it out. Now we're going to patch it into this second section here. Let's take the inverted envelope. We're going to patch that now into favorite avocado toast. We'll start off. Now you hear a very different sounding effect as the filter gets closed, as the sound rings out. That's one example of how we can use just a very simple set of utilities to create different modulation shapes. Let's explore this a little bit further, and we're going to use some of Nekyia's other modules for this. Instead of patching into Crazy Avocado Toast, I'm going to patch the output of our oscillator now into Muzzle. Now, Muzzle is a vactrol-based filter from Nekyia, so it's a new one of their modules that they sent to me. So let's take a listen to what this does. And what I'm just going to do is open up the VCA here. So I have the VCA wide open, turn down the resonance, and as we turn the frequency knob, you can hear it slowly responds, because the vactrols are a little slower than regular filters. It's a very nice kind of smooth filter effect. So we could take, for example, a wave here from Obsidian, just modulate away. Now, that in and of itself is not that impressive. After all, it's a filter and we can modulate the cutoff frequency. Big deal. Well, because this is vactrol-based, we can also do things like pinging it. And you notice it has this ping input here. Let's mult the output of the envelope stage here from Cadence that we're using to open the VCA. And this time we're going to take the VCA out of the picture entirely, and we're just going to patch the oscillator directly into the filter, because the filter can act like a low-pass gate if we turn the cutoff frequency all the way down and use this ping input. So let's now apply our output from Cadence to that and see what happens. So we get that really nice, ooh, that's nice. Now, straight away we notice we don't have too much control over the articulation of that envelope, because once the ping input is pinged, it just opens up the vactrol and it closes as to its own standard decay. But the ping input does respond to the voltage level. So if we attenuate this a little bit, using our Opal here, and then we'll patch the output of channel X into that ping input, and then we just turn this down a little. You see now as we bring it up, we have a little bit more control. There we go, a little bit more subtle now, isn't it? Nice, I like it. Now, if we didn't want to have to worry too much about, modulating and attenuating that ping input, we could also use, for example, this CV input, which basically just takes the CV input and applies it to the frequency. Now, this is an attenuator knob for that CV input. So you can do the same thing as we were doing with the ping. Slightly different sound, though, I think. You may not have Muzzle, but you may remember Sosumi from my first video. And Sosumi was the original dual vactrol-based low-pass gauge. Now, I say vactrols, actually handmade by Nekyia themselves, they actually made them using optocouplers that they made and sealed on the back of the module. So they're not vactrols in the classic old school sense of the word, but they do sound very, very similar. So we could take an input here and again take this output from Sosumi, and we have to strike the filter. So you could do that with the ping input, of course, where it's nice and plucky, much more plucky, I think, than Muzzle is. Muzzle actually is a much longer decay, if you remember the sound. But let's modulate. Let's modulate this CV here. Again, you could just take, say, for example, a wave from Obsidian. And of course, you're opening up the gate now at this stage. So it would be much more straightforward to use, say, a nice plucky envelope from Cadence. So to do that, we just want to mult our trigger here, and we're going to patch the trigger into the low pass gate, and we'll also patch that same trigger into the trigger input for the first channel on Cadence. Now we have a nice plucky low pass gate, but we've got better control using this envelope of the we've got better control of that decay time. Nice. And we can even modulate that decay now as well, do you see? And this middle section of Obsidian gives you these some difference min and max outputs, which, because these two LFOs cross-modulate each other and control by these knobs, you get lovely, crazy waveforms out of it. Now, say I didn't want the negative side of this modulation wave, because here, like, this is a bipolar LFO. So that side is too plucky. I don't want that. Well, what we can do is use this little middle section here of Mezcal, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to patch this bipolar LFO into this section here, and I am going to take the half wave rectified output, which is only the positive cycle of the LFO, and we're going to patch it in there. So I've just taken this first output here, which you just see is one triangle, and that's the positive side of the LFO cycle. Let's take a listen. So when it goes positive, I get positive modulation. If I patch it into this output with the two triangles here, this other output is called a full wave rectifier, and then we get positive when it goes positive, and of course when it's negative it gets inverted, so we get two positive peaks. It's like two peaks on a Toblerone. So it's like doubling the wave shape almost. Next patch idea I want to show you is how we could actually merge different waveforms using the Mezcal and also the Aikido mixer. So let's take a look at that, because we have a square, triangle, and sine wave output here on the Instro TSL. Now I've just patched the square, triangle, and sine wave in. So the first three channels on Aikido. That's what we're listening to there. But what we're going to do now is take three different envelopes from Cadence into each of the three channels. And I'm going to trigger these, but just with one trigger, and we're going to use that cascading envelope that we showed earlier to actually open each of these in turn, and then we'll hear each of the oscillators play a different sound. Let's take a listen. Okay, now let's trigger. Here, what I'm doing is I'm triggering the second envelope as soon as the first one finishes, I should say. That's kind of fun. And of course, by modulating and cross-modulating this, by modulating and cross-modulating it, we can have a lot of fun with the different decay times. So let's just take the three outputs here of the middle section, and we'll mult an LFO. We'll mult an LFO, say one of these max over here, into this section here. let's look at achieving the same thing, but without using an LFO. We are going to send them into this summing section here in Mezcal. And this is a great example of how you could use this to, for example, sum some different sounds. And because of the way it works, it won't clip. It takes a third from each, and so the sounds don't exceed the maximum eurorack level that you would want for an oscillator. And what we can do now is we can patch that sum into the input here on Muzzle, which is the filter. Now there's a wave folded output here. Let's use that. Now, I'm a little bit tired of hearing the same melody playing over and over, and I'm sure you are too. So let's just go right ahead and do a sort of Euclidean pattern there on trigger 3. A little bit of delay here coming out of vactrol-based. Okay, now we've got a wave shaper over here, wave folder, which we can modulate. And of course, if we want to modulate something, we need an LFO, and we have lots of that goodness going on over here. So let's patch the output of Obsidian. We'll take that min output, patch it into this section here. And I found this is a very useful section, especially when you've got bipolar LFOs. And we're going to patch that there into the wavefolding CV input. And if we open up the filter frequency while pinging, you see we can actually create more drone sound. And now if I open up the resonance, listen, hear all that. Oh, it's nice. Now, up till now, I've been triggering the drums using a classic step sequencer like that. But if we want to get a little experimental, and why not while we're at it, let's use something like Obsidian's outputs here to trigger our drum patterns. So if I do this, we will now be triggering our drum patterns using this square output here on the first LFO. And we could trigger, say, maybe a closed hat, so it's not quite so annoying. Now, that's nice. That's pretty good. We could also take, say, the max output here. I think that's that's the min output. We could use that. And switch these both to square mode. See, we're now creating interesting evolving drum rhythms because these are cross-modulating each other, remember? Using just these LFOs, which are on sync to any clock. They're not synced. Now let's look at another fun triggering idea, which is to generate ratchet effects by using one LFO on Obsidian to cross-modulate the other one to create the ratcheting effect. So again, what we're going to do is just take the output of this into the input here on Mezcal, and we'll patch that output, say, into the closed hats. Now, if you're listening, you'll see this side is generating the ratchet, but it's being modulated by this side over here. And I want this side to just be cut out of any cross modulation. So this is a slow moving LFO, and it's slowly speeding up and slowing down the ratcheting effect over here. If I speed up this side, we get a nice sort of looping ratchet. And we could clock it. And by adjusting this CV here, it's adjusting the amount of cross modulation. So we are adjusting the rate of the ratcheting all the way up into almost audio rates. So just a fun little idea I came up with while playing around with these modules for generating some ratchets. Probably not the way you would do it, but you know what? If you're stuck for a ratchet and you're looking for a way to do it, Obsidian can get you to almost where you want to go. While we're on the subject of Obsidian and combining it with Mezcal, let's use the outputs here with these middle sections to create interesting, much more complex modulation wave shapes. And we're going to use them to modulate pizza down here because we can really modulate that and get some very interesting sounds because, after all, it's an FM oscillator and a little modulation goes a long way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 3 triangle waves here, the 2 different sides, and this, let's just say take the difference input here, we'll patch that in there, and now we have a pretty crazy modulation source coming out of this, and what we could do with that then is patch it back up into the rectifier section, because we want to have 3 copies of it, half wave, full wave, and an inverted copy. So let's take a listen now. And what we will do is we will use the built-in envelope mode now on pizza, which you enable by pressing the button till you get all 3 lights flashing. Press and hold and it locks it in. And now control sets the built-in envelope shape. And what happens is a trigger, which we will take out of dot over here into the sync input, will trigger the oscillator. Just blink, turn it on. Just turn off the delay. Let's patch this half wave rectified into the FM index. So we're getting a nice modulated kind of FM index there. We can also modulate the wave shape. Well, it's just a fun little example of how we can combine different wave shapes using Mezcal and invert and rectify them over here, and then use that, ooh, quiet you, we're getting a little bit of feedback there off the delay, and then use the inverting rectifiers over here to kind of get the wave shapes into something closer to what we need for the modulation we're trying to achieve. Okay, let's bring everything together in one big monster patch. And what I've done this time is I'm playing a melody. Let's just mute the drums here on, let's see what I've got. I've got a melody playing here on pizza. But I'm also taking, that's the main oscillator. And I've got 3 envelopes here that I'm using to modulate that with a sequence coming out of Mimetic Digitalis. But I'm also taking the pulse oscillator into the bottom channel in Sosumi, which I'm triggering with this bottom envelope here from Cadence, just to bring in a little bit of variation. Okay, that's that side. And then what I've done is multed the same sequence over here into TSL, and I've taken the wave folded sine wave into Muzzle, triggering at the same time, and they're in tune. So we can bring them in. A bit of delay there on the TSL. We can have a whole heap of fun. Well, that was a whole lot of noisy fun. At least I had a whole lot of noisy fun. I hope you did too. Anyway, I hope today's video was useful to you, and it showed that you shouldn't underestimate the value of these basic utility modules. They will find a place in all of your patches. I'm finding myself reaching for Opal, for Obsidian, and for Mezcal and Cadence in a lot of the different setups I do. Sometimes you just want 3 quick envelopes with a bit of modulation, or some variable LFOs that can modulate themselves with some wave shaping on them. These are really useful modules to have in any setup. As always, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I love hearing from people, and let me know if you have any questions on the video or suggestions for future video. And thank you for watching.